Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, Ad Nauseam listeners, to episode 186. As always, my name is Dr. David C. Noe. The C stands for captious. And down here in the vomitorium with my good friend, the Montana Big Sky guy. So his t-shirt proclaims.
That's a place I've never been, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as a gift.
Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. What does the T stand for, Jeff?
Tenacious.
Tenacious.
Yeah, I think I've probably used that before.
You
but
have used it before.
I'm feeling it.
Tenacious J.
Tenacious J, yeah.
So you wear the t-shirt,
Yes.
though you've never visited the state of Montana.
No, my wife was a leader on a high school trip out there near Bozeman, and she brought back this lovely t-shirt for me.
Very nice.
Yes.
We don't want to devote too much time to the banter and to the warm-up because we got a little bit of a nudge from one of our listeners. I'm not going to give his full name, but we'll call him Tom. Okay. Because that is his name. And Tom pointed out something that was really nice.
Yeah.
He said, you're really taxing the listener's patience because it took almost 15 minutes before you got to the topic.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that, Jeff?
I mean, I will receive the criticism and assume good faith.
Better you than I.
All right. But I guess there's always the fast forward button on these things.
That's true.
We can always
banter all the harder, right? As they say.
Get to the meat of it. But
That's true.
Yeah.
So if 15 minutes was too much, should we do a solid 20 or 30 before we actually get to the content?
Oh, I like doing things just for spite.
You do?
Yeah.
It's one of the most underrated of all emotions.
It is. I agree.
Spite and resentment?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. But we'll try to keep it trim.
We'll keep it trim.
Yep.
Maybe we'll get our engineer to add in some chapters at some point. People can, banter part 1, banter part 7, subsection A, little 1. They can skip right to that.
Yes. And I believe Tom actually suggested the chapters.
He did.
Which
it's a brilliant suggestion.
An excellent idea.
So thank you, Tom. Thank you for listening. And we're going to get right to the meat of it today.
Yes, exactly. Well, after a little bit of banter.
Okay.
Because, as the kids say, it's been a minute.
It has.
Right? It's been a while since we've done one of these shows.
And the kids also talk about the vibe a lot.
They do, right?
And the vibe of the podcast is a little bit of silliness or maybe a lot of silliness and a little bit of instruction.
That's right, exactly.
So you've been off to Greece.
I have.
Briefly, I'm going to start my stopwatch here.
Yep.
Tell me about Greece.
It was great. So I got back a couple of weeks ago. I took 12 mostly wonderful students over there. And there's always a little bit of
there's some drama.
There's some drama there.
Sure.
As my friend and colleague put it, as I was telling her about this, she says, "Well, you have the stages.
That's
of a
right.
group like that. You have forming, norming, storming,
really,
and then renorming." And it was crazy how textbook that happened.
You mean the group dynamic?
The group dynamic, right? So we got together. We kind of established a kind of a baseline of how
that's the forming.
That's the forming, and then led to kind of the norming.
Right. So here's the clown. Right. One person's designated the cut up.
Exactly.
Another person is designated the worrier about where they're going to eat next.
Exactly.
A third person would be designated what?
Well, I mean, you pick your Jungian archetype, right? And so you all play a role, but inevitably those archetypes, they clash.
Okay.
And so we had a little bit of drama.
And you were Chewbacca? Was that kind of your role?
Chewbacca? Yeah, just kind of...
Right. So forming,
norming, then storming.
Storming is where the group's functioning really well. And is that right?
No.
Seeing all the sights, that's the storming?
No, the storming is when kind of the tensions bubble over.
Oh.
Right, exactly. So
that's a bit of a stretch that they call it storming.
Well, they just wanted the rhyme, right? So we had to have a little sit down and iron things out, and then after that, renorming. Things kind of went back to the
new normal.
The new normal, so it was great. But that's neither here nor there. It was great. It was sunny. It was very, very hot.
Yes.
As Greece can be in
Athens
June.
is hot for sure.
Yep. And it was actually, they were going through a heat wave.
Right.
But the way I like to look at it, no rain.
Mm-hmm.
The country was beautiful. We took an island hop cruise.
Aegina, I heard.
Aegina, Poros, and Hydra.
Oh, right.
Which was fantastic. Delphi, as always, magnificent.
Gorgeous.
And about half of the students were students that had taken the archaeology course with me. So they were primed invested in the subject matter, and that always helps to have a quorum of those kinds of students along. And so,
sure.
Yeah, and no issues. Nobody got injured. Nobody got lost. It was great.
So Athens, concrete, brick, marble just soaks up the sun.
It's a furnace.
And then radiates the heat all evening and even into the night.
Exactly. But at the same time, it was wonderful to, our hotel was right by the Ermu Street. It was that pedestrian walkway, which takes you from Syntagma down to Montesraki.
That's right.
And I mean, all of the vendors and the busking musicians. It was fantastic.
It's really nice.
I loved it.
Sure.
I loved it. Yep.
So you are, here's the first of many bad puns for this episode. You were definitely in loco parentis, right? For some of these folks.
Yep.
And sometimes it gets a little more loco than other times. Am I right?
It is, yes. Exactly.
So what do you do? Because you're solo, right? Loco solo. And you can't play good cop, bad cop, which is something you and I have done at points in our travels.
I did have a colleague along.
Oh, you did?
So I did. So we could do that. We could do that to a certain degree. And
who is this individual?
He's in my department. His name is Derek, and he's great. He's very personable.
Are you thinking about starting another podcast? I'm starting to get a little jealous.
No, not at all. Not at all. I don't think that would go well.
Okay.
Right? But Derek was great. I mean, he's younger than I am, and so he could kind of get with the kids in a way that I can't anymore.
Right.
So we could play that role.
Right.
And that worked out quite well.
Excellent.
Yep. And you, Dave, you were off even further away from home in South Africa.
Yes, I looked it up and I found that when I was in Cape Town, this is the farthest I have been geographically from my hometown ever.
Yeah.
By just a little bit.
But I'm
distant.
I'm thinking of a globe in my brain now, but it would be hard to get a lot further. I mean, you went to
parts of Russia
New Zealand?
and such. Sure.
Yeah.
When I was in South Korea, I was a long way from home, but Cape Town, just as the crow flies, just a little bit further.
Yeah.
So,
what were you doing there?
Well, I was giving a lecture on Theodore Beza. And
that's a long way to go for a lecture.
Well, I was invited,
Fantastic.
right?
Yeah, you don't turn that down.
Exactly. And a little bit of a vacation with Mrs. Noe, took her along.
Yeah.
And also preached at the church there, the Reformed Church of the Southern Suburbs, it's called, in Cape Town.
Yeah.
Did some sightseeing. I got to see lions, got to pet a cheetah.
You got to pet a cheetah?
That's correct.
I didn't realize they were petable.
Well, it's at the Cheetah Conservatory.
Okay.
That's the name of it. The cheetahs play cellos and violins and harps and voice lessons and things.
Yes, right.
And no, it's a place where they're raising money and raising awareness for the plight of the cheetahs.
Are they endangered?
Yes, and they have one, just close to endangered. They have one designated there that people can pet, for a large fee.
Yes.
And then the funds go to...
Gotcha.
So it's okay.
So and, they pick their chillest...
this one was raised on a bottle, and it's still very controlled because it's a wild animal.
Right.
But the Afrikaners that I was hanging out with, they live like Homeric heroes. I have never eaten so much beef and drank so much red wine in moderation in 1 week in my entire life.
Is that right?
It was fantastic.
So they were slaughtering the
hecatombs,
the goats, and
that's right.
Yeah,
the kinds, putting them on spits.
Man,
they have barbecues in their homes called a braai. So these people know how to live.
Right, man.
It was excellent.
Was there any like singing or recitation after
there was
dinner?
A little bit of singing, not too much recitation. There was a lot of joking.
Okay,
and got some people interested in the podcast as well.
Ah, fantastic.
So I'd like to say hello to John and Martin and Louis and Alex. Hopefully they are listening.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. What a lovely country.
Yes. Oh, fantastic.
Yep. Speaking of lovely countries.
Yes.
We are doing today a 4th of July themed episode.
Yep. A little late.
Yeah. Yesterday was the 4th, but that's okay.
Yeah.
The 4th has a kind of penumbra, you might say.
There we go.
Right? It emanates. You can enjoy it a few days after.
Indeed.
So what are we talking about precisely today, Jeff? Here we are at minute 8:30. That's about the right amount of banter.
Yes. Well, we are getting into chapter 5 of a book that we have been working our way through over the last several months.
Yeah, it's a year.
A year? Yeah. So this is Carl Richard's The Golden Age of Classics in America, right?
So we're not going to Mahru?
No, not Maru today, right? We are talking about this book that delves into the influence of the classics on early America. Yeah.
I think that you miss Mahru.
Yeah, I'm okay with Maru. Maru can stay over there for a while.
Okay, I think you will Maru the day.
Is that your bit?
That's my bit. That you did not return to Mahru and the history of education in antiquity.
We'll get there.
All right.
We'll get back to him. But today we're talking about chapter 5 in Richard's book on Romanticism.
That's right.
I thought this was really, really interesting.
Really?
Yes, I love this era in European and American history. And
I did not like it.
Oh my goodness, this sounds good.
A little bit of contrast. So the golden age of the classics in America, Carl Richard, 2009, chapter 5, as you said, and the theme is Romanticism.
Yes.
So part 7. Jeff, as we get into this, can you set it up for us? What is Romanticism and what does it have to do with the classics?
Right. Well, I want to reference, I think I brought this up on the show before, something I'm fascinated by, but it's one of these theories about the rhythms of history.
Okay.
Right? That you have periods of kind of deep rationality, intellectualism, mathematic approaches, a way of kind of understanding, looking at the world, which are then followed by more chaotic, irrational, more mystical kind of periods.
Okay.
So for example, the classical era gives way to the Hellenistic era.
Okay.
So if you were to compare a kind of a statue from the classical era, very poised, kind of emotionless in the face, perfectly balanced, and compare that with, say, the famous Laocoon, where you have the kind of the twisted bodies and the agony on the face and the serpents and Hellenistic era, right? And so it's that's often kind of used as kind of an emblem of kind of the theme of one era kind of giving way to the next.
Okay.
And so here we have Romanticism, and of course this is all in hindsight, of course. So people in the early 19th century say, "Oh yes, well, how are you enjoying the Romantic era?"
Correct.
Right? But this follows on the heels of what we call the Enlightenment, right? And so a place or an era of science and rationality and by the numbers gives way to this kind of this mystical era. So if you compare, say, the fugues of Bach, are much more kind of mathematical in a way that if you compare it to kind of the bombast of Beethoven, who's as a representative of the Romantic era.
Nice.
Right? And then you also have, this was all over this chapter, is the divinity of nature. Right. You're not going to find God in the with your slide rule. Right. You're going to find God in the forest.
You're also not going to find him in Revelation, right? In the scriptures.
Right. Exactly.
This is what the Romantics say repeatedly. And so this is one of the things that, one of the themes, I would say, Richard develops, which separates the intellectuals of this era quite starkly from the founding generation.
Right. So there's lots of reference here to Thoreau, to Emerson, even Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
So like
Herman Melville, Nathaniel Hawthorne,
Walt Whitman.
Right.
But yeah, so like Gothic literature and art gets kind of woven into this period as well.
Of all the names that we mentioned, I'm only an admirer of Melville and Poe. I haven't warmed up to any of the others.
Yeah, I can't say I'm shocked that you never had a love for
Whitman.
for the transcendentalists.
Right.
Well, I thought this was really interesting about how in previous chapters, the name Aristotle, of course, is very important, right? Without Aristotle, you don't get the Enlightenment to some degree.
You don't get Western civilization,
right? And so, Richard, I thought this was really helpful. Kind of breaks this down. Is that Aristotle, if you want to compare him to Plato, Aristotle says, how do you understand the world? It's from the outside in, right? You use your senses and you take in
through
the world,
examination and then reasoning through the results of what you have observed.
Exactly, right. And that's an Enlightenment principle right there. The Romantic era says, no, let's go to Plato, right? And particularly kind of the more kind of mystical aspects of Plato, where where do you find truth? Where do you find being? Where do you find God?
Right.
You find it within. It starts inside and then moves outward.
Yes. Now, I'm no expert in transcendentalism or this era, Romanticism. I'm only a small expert in Plato. But after reading the chapter, I don't think they're reading Plato very accurately.
Well, I agree with that, right? And so, Richard makes much of how, so many of the Romantics and so many of the transcendentalists, they were very much against, don't imitate these guys, right? Don't, do what Plato did, or I think there's a quote in there where one of these guys says something like no one became Shakespeare by imitating or copying Shakespeare, right? And so I think that a transcendentalist would say, well, we're using Plato in that he represents kind of the spirit of the classics,
correct,
right? And so I think because they're not kind of relying on specific, well, let's look at the Gorgias,
right?
It comes off much more. It's like, well, let's just look at kind of what Plato represents.
It's very impressionistic, not very analytical, precise. I don't know.
Yeah.
You could tell I wouldn't like it. So let's get started.
Okay, let's get started.
Romanticism. Says Richard, this is on page 120. In the antebellum period, nationalism and democracy merged with Romanticism to form the United States' first national literature. Although American Romanticism emphasized enjoyment of the present over preoccupation with the past, and nature over scholarship as the true source of enlightenment, emphases that might have caused the Romantics to repudiate the classics, these very emphases were largely based on the Platonic valuation of intuition over reason and experience.
Yes, right.
So this is one of the great things about Richard as a writer. That first sentence says it all.
It does.
Right? Those first two sentences, I should say.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant encapsulation of the theme of the chapter altogether.
Exactly, right. I really wish Mr. Maru would take a page. No, I'm not going to go there. Not going to go there. Right?
All right.
But you're right. I mean, this is perfect, and the way that Richard will sum up his chapters in the last paragraph too is just absolutely brilliant.
It's great.
It's great.
But you'd like it at the beginning to point the way.
Yes. Let me just read a little bit more because I think this is also. It says, while the Romantics, like the founders before them, inveighed against the slavish, uncritical acceptance of all things classical, they revered the ancients, even suggesting that the ancients' positions closer to the dawn of time had given them a clearer understanding of truth. He comes back to that theme a number of times, which I thought was really interesting. So the fact that the ancients are simply chronologically closer to the beginning of things makes them purer.
They're younger.
Right.
They're childlike.
Right. And so it's not a surprise that out of the same era comes the whole notion of the noble savage.
Right.
And so you get the treatment of the native indigenous peoples and Native Americans as being kind of inherently morally better than the European settler because they're closer to nature, they're closer to the earth, and they're closer to the beginning of things.
Yep.
Right.
The very next sentence also sounds an important theme. The transcendentalists, says Richard, liked the ancients' moralism and love of nature and viewed individual classical figures like Socrates as the greatest models of nonconformity, men whose courage had enabled them to heed their own inner voices in contradiction to the dogmas of their societies.
Yeah.
Now, this is why, I mean, if this is true what Richard says about the transcendentalists, I'm sure it is, this is why the majority of the chapter says almost nothing about the Romans.
Yes.
Because you can't say about the Romans that they celebrated nonconformists.
Right, exactly right.
They were a bureaucratic machine.
Yes.
With the exception maybe of Seneca is praised here as a representative of Stoicism, which I don't think fits very well in the overall Romantic project. And in addition, Plutarch, who wrote in Greek but lived in Rome.
Right.
And celebrated a lot of Roman heroes in a way that I don't see how it really fits with Romantic themes and impulses.
I guess so Richard actually ends his chapter talking about Plutarch and his place in all of this. I mean, I guess if you look at Plutarch's parallel lives, he deliberately choosing a philosophical Roman paired with a militaristic Greek.
Right.
He is saying, okay, well, those stereotypes of the Greek being the intellectual, the Roman being the spear wielder.
Correct.
By flipping that around, I guess he's saying, well, who didn't conform to those stereotypes in their own era, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So the first section, a national literature for a democratic Romantic age. So the way I read this portion of Richard's chapter is there's a bit of a conflict or a bit of a question. What kind of a people can produce good literature?
Yes.
So he cites this individual, Thomas Dew. This is in the second open paragraph. Thomas Dew attacked the European dogma based on the glorious literature of Augustan Rome that works of literary genius required royal patronage. So can you draw that out a little bit for our listeners?
Right. So I mean, he's talking about the idea of looking at Augustan Rome as a golden age of Roman poetry,
right.
Latin poetry, right?
Virgil, Ovid, Tibullus,
right,
the whole crew.
And he's kind of attacking the argument. Well, that could only have happened if Augustine hadn't put his money and his weight, or guys like Maecenas hadn't gathered the circle around them. That's what the argument he's attacking is that could only have happened if there hadn't been this kind of patronage.
Right.
Yes.
So in other words, a democratic society isn't able to produce great literature.
Yes. Right.
But Thomas wants to refute that notion.
He does.
Because as a patriotic American, he wants to think our new experiment is going to reach the heights of literature.
Exactly right. So he continues, he says, Augustus and Maecenas may lavish today the imperial treasures upon literature, but Tiberius and Sejanus may starve and prescribe it tomorrow.
Right.
So he seems to be saying that it really has nothing to do with, you need an autocrat, right? Because,
it's the character of the people more than the form of government.
Right. Or you could say, quickly, your Augustus could be succeeded by a Tiberius, right? And then the whole thing just kind of goes out the window.
Right.
Right.
So then he also cites Constantine the Great as an example of an autocrat who had massive resources but couldn't revive any kind of ancient art or literature during his time period. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's true. There was a flowering, you might say, of literature under Constantine, like Lactantius, whom we talked about.
Right.
But there wasn't a whole lot in terms of drama and such.
Right. So let's go down to the next page on 122, where Dew extends his argument. And here Richard writes, after lauding the astonishing literature produced by the Greek democracies, works of genius that the European monarchists glossed over, Dew expressed his confidence in the future greatness of American letters. He predicted, quote, we shall then have an empire formed by mere internal development, as populous as that of Rome, and much more wealthy, speaking all the same language, and living under the same or similar institutions. Such a democratic empire, blessed by modern commercial prosperity, would provide a vast market for literature, a form of patronage beyond what kings and princes can furnish.
So Dew was right in one sense. I mean, we don't all speak the same language, but most people speak English, and we have far surpassed Rome's population. I think under Constantine, it was 1 million individuals in Italy,
right?
Which was the most populous part of the empire. Now, the United States is a little over 330 million, so vastly exceeded that.
Yes.
But what about his comment, a vast market for literature?
Well, I mean, I think to some degree he's right. I mean, the Richard or Dew doesn't mention it here, but of course. Levels of literacy would play a huge role in this argument, right? And so, estimates about who was literate in first century Rome says it was very few people,
10% or less,
right? And so the way people got their literature was if you couldn't read, as you heard it performed,
correct,
right? And you
listened to podcast or top 40 radio, right? That was
exactly right. Yeah, and I mean, to own a book. Back then was also an incredibly expensive
out of reach
enterprise, and so if you consider literacy and post Gutenberg mass production of books, we could be talking apples and oranges to a certain degree.
Fair,
but I guess idea that democracy will produce a more broadly educated populace, and a more prosperous populace, and therefore time, leisure, and money to buy books.
Okay,
and so I think he's onto something here.
Yeah, well, he is definitely, but his argument, I think Thomas Dew's argument is that America will excel and then surpass the ancient societies in the production of high quality
literature. Right, that's the next
I'm not sure I don't think it has happened. Herman Melville, Moby Dick, we've talked about this before, has the best claim to being an American epic.
Yeah.
So that's the part of this chapter I really enjoyed. But I'm not convinced we have an American epic.
Right. So we'll get to Melville. I have to admit that...
that caused you to snooze?
Well, Moby Dick is chloroform in print.
That's a great novel.
But I think we should talk about something that I think we mentioned to each other off mic, was walking into a bookstore.
Yeah.
Or I compare this also doing the doom scroll through Netflix.
Sure.
Right. It's this more is more
right.
philosophy that I think it's harder and harder to find those diamonds in the rough.
So something that stands out.
When you have an Augustus or Maecenas basically being the gatekeepers, I mean they're releasing these polished diamonds, whereas at a mass market there's good stuff out there. But one, it's not necessarily going to be loved by the public because public tastes don't necessarily gravitate towards.
What kind of elitist are you?
A huge one.
Okay.
And two, it's just going to make it that much more difficult to kind of find this. So
we need time to filter things out.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly right.
Let's move on to the second part of the chapter: the repudiation of slavishness.
Okay.
Jeff, can you set this up for us?
Yes. Well, let me just set it up by reading the intro paragraph here. Richard writes, the Romantics eschewed the antiquarianism and abject slavishness of some antebellum classicists, qualities that conflicted with the transcendentalist emphases on living in the present and on nonconformity. Walt Whitman, the least classical of all the Romantics, wrote concerning the classics these 2 lines here: regarding it all intently a long while, then dismissing it, I stand in my place with my own day here.
What does that mean?
Yes, I've never been a huge fan of Whitman. But I mean, he's saying
his most famous set of poems is Leaves of Grass.
Yes, right. That was
Pages of Boredom. Is that the alternative title?
I think it was one of those books that like years ago you'd give someone as a gift on graduation. It would just remain unopened and unread. Right. But I think the point is here is that why are we obsessing with the past? Well, the only thing that matters is the here and
what
now.
What we're doing now.
Right.
Yep. All right. So to go on, Richard writes, Whitman criticized the British poet John Keats for his slavishness. Quote, Keats's poetry is ornamental, elaborated, rich in wrought imagery. Isn't that good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
it is imbued with the sentiment of the gods and goddesses of 2,500 years ago. I would say that's also good.
Yes.
I'm editorializing, you realize. Its feeling is the feeling of a gentlemanly person lately at college, accepting what was commanded him there, who moves and would only move in elegant society, reading classical books in libraries. Of life in the 19th century, it has none, any more than the statues have. It does not come home at all to the direct wants of the bodies and souls of the century.
Well, so I see in there, this mention of college there, this idea that college is producing these automatons.
Right.
They're just, just slavishly
reading books of classical literature.
And copying things of classical literature here. Yeah.
None of which happens today, by the way.
Right.
I mean, the historical moment has moved on.
Yeah.
I wonder what Whitman would say today if he were to encounter a completely pragmatic, almost entirely, I would say, outcomes-based kind of education, which is for employment.
Yeah. I don't know. And I also find kind of this... like on the first page, Richard refers to Socrates, right? And so the transcendentalists love Socrates, not for any of his real philosophies or insights of humanity, but they just like that he kind of stuck it to the man.
Exactly.
Right? And so that kind of standing out and being, a person standing out from and above everybody else is also very much an often very annoying romantic ideal. Right.
Yeah. Well, let's skip the next little bit about Poe, as interesting as it is.
Yes.
And go on to Nathaniel Hawthorne and his trip to the British Museum.
I thought this was really interesting.
It was fascinating.
Yeah.
Can you share that, Jeff?
Yeah. Picking it up on that same page. Other romantics shared this distaste for the slavish imitation of classical works. While at the British Museum one day, Nathaniel Hawthorne could wish that, quote, the Elgin marbles and the friezes of the Parthenon were all burnt into lime.
What a crazed man.
Yes. Now, he comes around.
I know, but why would he say that? I dropped the book when I read that.
It's crazy.
Why does he desire the destruction of beautiful antiques?
Yeah, well, Richard continues. He explained, we have not time in our earthly existence to appreciate what is warm with life and immediately around us, yet we heap up all these old shells out of which human life has long emerged.
Yeah, that is a kind of strange false dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
Every time I've been to the British Museum, I have enjoyed the experience with a friend or family member.
Yeah.
It's not, lifelessness versus warmth, right? You see these beautiful statues and together you stand in awe.
Indeed.
Then you go have fish and chips and talk about it.
Exactly.
It's very human.
Exactly right.
So I don't understand. Maybe I'm just not an artist like Hawthorne, and he feels constrained by the admiration of the form instead of people, I don't know, dedicating themselves to new art.
I guess so. I mean, throughout this chapter, and certainly here, I kind of saw that that very kind of American archetype or stereotype of the maverick, right? And it's this idea that everything has to be new,
right?
And it has to be different, right? And I was kind of hearing Hawthorne's voice as kind of like a hippie, like you're living in the past, man.
Have you read any Hawthorne?
I know I have. I'm
Scarlet Letter.
Scarlet Letter, which I hated.
High School.
Yes. Some of his short stories I liked, but yeah.
The Tanglewood Tales, which you'll talk about later, is all about classical themes, including Midas and so forth.
Right.
I tried to read The House of the Seven Gables once.
Unreadable.
Right. It's like I don't know, the Book of the Endless Dictionary.
Right.
Hawthorne is just constantly showing off the expansiveness of his vocabulary.
Right. I remember once traveling in the Northeast, and a friend who was a local took me to see the House of the Seven Gables.
It's a real thing?
It's a real thing, and I went there and I counted them, and there were indeed 7, but that was about it.
Then did you get some fish and chips?
We got some. We got some lobster.
Okay, because it's in New England.
New England, right.
So then share with us, Jeff, the parenthesis about how Hawthorne came around.
He did come around. So, Richard, on a later visit, Hawthorne not only repented of his desire to pulverize the elven marbles, but even doubted whether such an act could achieve its purpose. Oh, really? Since, quote, the grace and nobility seems so deep in them as the very heart of the stone.
Finally, Nate.
Exactly.
Right?
So it took him 2 boat trips across the Atlantic.
Yeah, you couldn't just take a flight to Heathrow and take the tube to British Museum. It took a huge effort.
Well, I'm glad that Nate came around.
I am glad too. Right. Then we move on to RWE.
RWE, Ralph Waldo Emerson.
And his famous essay, Self-Reliance. Yeah. What does he have to say about the Greeks?
Can you pick that up? Why don't you read that?
Sure. So this is the bottom of 123 and the top of 124. Richard writes, Ralph Waldo Emerson, in his famous essay, Self-Reliance, repudiated the worship of the ancients and of other past heroes. He wrote, quote, the roses under my window make no reference to former roses or to better ones. They are what they are. You're chuckling already.
I kind of like that, actually.
You do? Yeah. I'd like to attack it in a minute. They exist with God today. That which each can do best, none but his maker can teach him. Shakespeare will never be made by the study of Shakespeare. For Emerson, the key to genius was to listen to one's own inner voice, which constituted one's connection with God, rather than modeling oneself on anyone else, however esteemed. So, Jeff, tell me what you like about the roses.
Well, I mean, I just like it as kind of a visual metaphor. I don't agree with Emerson in kind of ultimately what he's trying to say there. Shakespeare will never be made by the study of Shakespeare. A lot of this stuff strikes me as, it reminds me a lot of what in my religion class when we teach like Buddhism, right? The only thing that matters is the here and now. Like, you can't control the past, you can't control the future.
All true,
right? But kind of the focus on being kind of the standout individual, unique voice here,
right?
It goes too far, right?
Yeah.
I would say if there is going to be a next Shakespeare, my sense is that next Shakespeare should probably have some familiarity with Shakespeare, right?
It's also just kind of false, isn't it? The roses under my window make no reference to former roses. Right. Of course they do.
Of course they do.
They come directly from the roses that, created them through whatever kind of generation roses go through.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't understand that.
Right.
I guess only when you have a high degree of artistic development can you, what's the word I'm looking for? Look down upon the way that you got there. You can pull the ladder up once you're in the fortress, so that others can't climb up behind you.
I guess so. I mean, that's what it strikes me too. I don't really quite understand where this petulance comes from. Right? Is it just comes to this desire to be just so starkly different that we are not the authors, the poets of the past. We are forging our own path. Mm-hmm. I mean, is that really just what it's about here?
I guess.
Because it strikes me as so emotional rather than an argument that really holds together.
Right. Well, let's drag in John Adams here for just a minute before we go on to the next section.
Okay.
It's the next open paragraph, and could you read a little bit of that, please, where he talks about John Adams lecturing his son?
Yeah. Yes, in their condemnation of slavishness, the Romantics were hardly alone. Even John Adams had paused in the midst of lecturing John Quincy on the importance of studying the classics to warn his eldest son, quote, these great masters of antiquity you must sooner or later be able to judge critically, but you must never imitate them. Study nature and write accordingly, and you will resemble them. But it is nature, not the ancients, that you are to imitate and copy. Yeah, I mean, it sounds very Taoist.
It does. It's a revocation of any kind of sense of the value of education, of what you can learn by the imitation of what others have done. It doesn't work in music. It doesn't work in architecture. It doesn't work in sports and games like chess and so forth. Yeah. Now, somebody listening might say, Dave, you're really being narrow-minded and hard-headed. Can't you grasp that what Adams or Emerson is after is a kind of striving for, the essence of the activity?
Yeah.
My answer is no. I can't grasp that. I don't really understand the petulance, like you said.
Right. And even so, it is nature that you are to imitate and copy. what does that even mean?
I think it means that individuals like Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes, the Greek masters, Praxiteles and so forth, what they did was, what they accomplished was by listening carefully to some kind of nature speaking to them from their subject matter. And I agree that that's probably true. Human nature, the divine that spread throughout the universe.
Yeah.
Although I'm not a pantheist, obviously.
Right.
But if we're going to try to do that, we can't just kind of sit around and wait for inspiration to hit. Don't we have to imitate what others have done and then try?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think what I also see here too is Richard in the chapter talks a lot about simplicity, right?
Right.
And that it being kind of the heart of kind of a romantic view of the world. There's the scripture that calls to mind is when Jesus says, don't worry about your life. Look at the birds and look at the flowers.
Yeah, right? The lilies of the field.
Right. There's kind of a natural kind of simplicity and beauty and harmony in nature.
Sure.
And with all of our striving, right, we don't recognize.
You can miss that for sure.
Yes, right.
But Christ was talking to his disciples about not worrying too much about where their food and clothing was coming from.
Right.
He wasn't lecturing individuals who wanted to write massive epics.
Right. Yeah, true enough.
That would survive millennia.
Right.
Imagine if Virgil were to take this advice.
Yeah. Yeah.
One final little point, Jeff, before we get to the next section.
Yeah.
Richard mentions this individual, George Fitzhugh, whom he labels a thorough opponent of Romanticism and as fervent a supporter of the classics as you could find. Then he says, like Fitzhugh, this is page 125, who used classical examples to argue against, quote, classical laws, Emerson quoted ancient authorities in support of his emphasis on the enjoyment of the present. As early as 1820, he quoted Horace, a poet who enjoyed the present as much as anyone, right? Carpe diem. Quote, nor in thy youth neglect sweet love nor dances, while life is still in its bloom and crabbed age is far away. End quote. The past was not to be studied for its own sake, this is Emerson channeling Horace, but for the benefit of the present. Emerson wrote, quote, the use of literature is to afford us a platform whence we may command a view of our present life, a purchase by which we may move it. We fill ourselves with ancient learning, install ourselves the best we can in Greek, in Punic, in Roman houses, only that we may wiselier see French, English, and American houses and modes of living. End quote. This is why I don't like Emerson.
Because he undercut the argument they just made.
Exactly. But also it's a completely instrumentalized view of literature. It seems to me.
Yeah.
Right? Study literature so that you can, I don't know, get more enjoyment out of your study of French and English and American houses and modes of living.
Right.
That doesn't seem honestly charitable.
No, I agree. I mean, and I can't remember somebody threw Keats under the bus.
Yes.
On a previous page. I mean, Keats, also a romantic, but he also, truth is beauty, beauty is truth, right? And he saw kind of literature and poetry has its own value and wonder.
Right.
Whereas Emerson would say, well, how's it going to help me build this house?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and not in the sense of measuring and such.
Right.
But build a great house.
Build a great house. Yeah.
Who cares?
Right.
The final quote here.
Yes.
Emerson saw no irony in quoting a line from Ovid in the original Latin that translates as, quote, let the ancient times delight other folk. I congratulate myself that I was not born till now. Now, of course, end quote, Ovid is saying that facetiously.
Yeah.
I congratulate myself. My big accomplishment was that I wasn't born till now. Does Emerson miss the humor?
I think so.
Do you really?
From what I know of Emerson, I think that, I probably he's taking this at face value. I don't think there's an undercurrent of he's not smirking.
All right.
So I could be wrong.
Okay.
But,
well, speaking of smirking undercurrents,
yes,
it's time for the ads.
Do it. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Hackett Publishing. These guys have been with our humble little podcast since the very beginning. We floated the idea out there, hey, would you want to get behind this idea? Because I think our philosophies line up.
That's right.
And like we try to do with this podcast, Hackett is a company that is keeping the flame alive. Mm-hmm. And since 1970, they have been doing just that with their attractive, affordable, erudite translations and publications of all these wonderful books. Do yourself a favor and flesh out your own library with books from this great company.
Did you say flesh out?
I said flesh out.
I'm glad that you said that. A lot of people say flush out.
Flush out.
You heard people say that? Flush it out.
But they mean flesh out.
They mean flesh out, but I don't think they really want to flush out their library.
No, like scaring things out of the bushes.
Or just deluging them with a lot of water.
Right.
So I went to hackettpublishing.com while you were talking so eloquently, and I see on the landing page 3 columns. Asian Studies, Readings in Classical Chinese Philosophy, An Introduction to Utilitarianism, should be a useful book, From Theory to Practice, and a new translation of the Heroides, our guy Ovid, by Stan Lombardo, introduction, and Melina McClure, with an introduction by Tara Welch.
Man, Stan the man, he never stops, does he?
He never stops. Then we have so much other great stuff, including Aristophanes' Lysistrata. We have Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling, something called Kudrun. Do you know about that?
I'm not familiar with Kudrun.
I think it's maybe some Buddhist or Hindu instruction. Then we have the whole Lingua Latina series.
Yes.
So much great stuff on the website of Hackett Publishing.
Right. And if you go to that website, hackettpublishing.com, that's HACKETT publishing.com, you can see this for yourself. You'll see how affordable these books are and the wide ranging of titles that are available there. So do yourself a favor, go to that website, find the books that you want, put them in a little grocery basket, and if you use this coupon code, AN2025, that's AN as an odd Navseam plus the current year, Dave, that will get them
20% off.
Yes.
So not only are the books affordable, they just became more affordable, 20% off, and you're going to get free shipping.
Yes, right.
Now, does Hackett have any competitors, Jeff?
Yes, I was just reading about this today.
Were you really?
Yes. Have you heard of this newcomer, Trackett?
Trackett
Publishing? Yes,
no.
Exactly right.
Who is Trackett and what do they do?
Well, you order books from them.
Okay.
And then you will get texts and updates and emails that will constantly tell you where the book is. They will track it.
Okay.
But the catch is that the book never actually arrives.
The volume never arrives?
It never arrives. Right?
So the whole joy is just knowing that it's on its way.
It's out there and it's somewhere.
Correct.
Exactly.
So that's Trackett Publishing.
That's Trackett Publishing.
Trackett.
Yes, exactly.
But don't go there.
I wouldn't go there.
Go to Hackett, because Hackett would never do that to you, would they?
No, they would never do that.
No.
Right.
Free shipping, the book will actually arrive.
Yes. So do yourself a favor. Check out hackettpublishing.com today.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by the great folks at Ratio Coffee. My friend Mark Helweg, the American entrepreneur, tried to up everybody's coffee game, and he succeeded with the Ratio 8, the Ratio 6, and now the Ratio 4, the full fleet. Jeff, during your travels in Greece, did you imbibe from the coffee bean?
I did, sadly, from the in-house hotel machine.
Oh,
it was the
that's a gruel.
It was
isn't
the marsupad.
Yeah, there's chunks of coffee.
Yes, it was awful, and so every day. I mean, I love traveling in Greece, but one of the downsides was being away.
I'll bet.
From my Ratio 8 back home.
I'm sure that was a unique kind of suffering.
It was, right. But now that I'm back, I've got the Ratio 8 at home. I have in the past used the Ratio 6, another wonderful machine, and now in my office I have the Ratio 4. My coffee game is, I think, at its peak.
Yes, at its peak.
Yep.
So I was in South Africa, thanks for asking, and the coffee there was pretty good.
Yeah.
Because one of the most popular places to get coffee was a place called Bootlegger.
Okay.
Bootlegger. You know what bootleggers did during Prohibition, right?
Yeah,
they sold hooch.
Yes, indeed.
Illegally.
Bathtub gin.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, the coffee at Bootlegger was very good, but I couldn't really enjoy it because the name of the store sounds too much like boot liquor.
Ah, okay, that got in the way?
Yes, okay. That homophone, it ruined it, right? Boot liquor. Who wants to drink coffee at a place called Boot Liquor?
Right, exactly. Just a bunch of sycophants.
It's awful.
Running around, right. Yeah.
And so I was very happy to get back to the good old US of A, where in my kitchen on the countertop is the Ratio 4.
The Ratio 4.
And
yes.
it was excellent.
That's actually, it's perfect for you because you're the only one in your family that drinks coffee, right?
Yep. But during the colloquium, which is coming up pretty soon, we're going to bust out the Ratio 8 again, the Millennium Falcon of coffee makers.
Indeed.
And everyone's going to enjoy its goodness. So, listener, don't go to the Bean and Bagelized Barnery.
No.
Don't go to Fire Down Below, manufacturer of scorch pads. Instead, and don't get those Gurek, right?
Right, the marsupods, exactly.
A little bit of Joey in every sip. What should they do instead?
They should go to ratiocoffee.com. Listener, if you want to up your coffee game, It's a little bit. This is not cheap stuff.
It's attainable, but why would you want to buy cheap stuff?
Exactly
for the daily ritual,
right? So if you're playing the long game, get yourself one of these machines. The ratio 8. For your kitchen countertop, maybe the ratio 4. If you're the only person that drinks coffee in your house or something,
the 4 is ideal
for the office.
Right.
You cannot go wrong.
Not Dak and Blecker.
No.
Not Monsieur Coffee.
No.
But the ratio 4.
The ratio 4. Yep.
And they should go to ratiocoffee.com/ad nauseum.
Yes.
And then they need to enter a coupon code, Jeff. And what is that coupon code?
AN ratio ad nauseum. Right?
No.
Did I get that wrong?
It's AN ratio 2025.
That's sorry. Yes. Ignore me. It's like we said, it's been a while.
It has been a while. Then they get a huge discount off their order.
Indeed. Check it out. This episode is also brought to you by Della Chelpka Art. Ready for art that truly speaks to your story? Meet Della, a Tucson-based oil painter who captures the people, places, and moments you cherish with breathtaking detail. She showcased her work in multiple galleries, illustrated books, and is often commissioned for standout projects. You can see her current works for sale at her website, dellachelpka.art. That's DELLACHELPKA.art. And to find your inspiration, visit there. Use the coupon code Apelles.
Apelles?
Yes.
What is that,
He's one of the most famous, if not the most famous, artist from Greco-Roman antiquity.
All right.
Painter. And if you use that coupon code Apelles, that's APELLES, you will receive a 10% discount on anything you might order from Della.
Yes, so check out her great works of art, visit the website, look around, see something you like, and take advantage of this wonderful discount we're offering. Jeff, as we resume our discussion of this fascinating chapter, let's skip ahead to page 128.
Let's do it.
Here we're talking about the transcendentalists' interest in Neoplatonism and Stoicism. Says Richard in the middle of that page, as early as 1820, in his Bowdoin Prize-winning essay at Harvard, The Character of Socrates, Emerson praised the Athenian philosopher as found in the dialogues of Plato. Emerson asserted, quote, regard this character of Socrates, and we shall be inclined to wonder that men without revelation, merely by the light of reason and nature, could set forth a model of moral perfection which the wise in any age would do well to imitate. This patriotic philosopher extended his wisdom to the body of the people in the first city in the world and communicated to his disciples not a mysterious or hieroglyphical scripture to amuse the learned and awe the ignorant, but practical rules of life adapted immediately to their condition and little infected with the dogmas of the age. End quote.
All right, so right away we have Socrates laid out by Emerson as someone unique and individual, doing something different. He's kind of a man of the moment.
Right.
But we also have that element that we were just talking about, that it's not mysticism, it's not something kind of hidden and Gnostic, it's very practical.
Right.
Yeah. So both of those things too. I think that, there's definitely some truth to that too, but I think he also...
In his characterization of Socrates,
yes.
You're saying.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But, if you read the Meno, there are elaborate geometrical proofs. Emerson doesn't seem so excited about that.
No, and by and large, it seems that these romantics are much more interested in kind of what these men represent,
right,
rather than what particularly they are saying or teaching.
Mm.
All right, moving ahead. So at the top, near the top of page 131,
right,
Richard writes, Henry David Thoreau and Margaret Fuller, other leading transcendentalists, shared Emerson's Platonic idealism. Thoreau wrote, but there is only necessary a moment's sanity and sound sense to teach us that there is a nature beyond the ordinary. We live on the outskirts of that region. Is not nature rightly read, that of which she is commonly taken to be the symbol merely? I am not without hope that we may, even here and now, obtain some accurate information concerning that other world which the instinct of mankind has so long predicted.
Interesting.
So here we're starting to get into kind of, this is Thoreau.
This is the realm of the forms.
The realms of the forms, exactly right. And so this is kind of mystical Platonism.
Yes.
Right.
So to continue, in Thoreau's imagination, ancient Greece was the closest earthly approximation to Plato's ideal world of the forms. Mm-hmm. He found Aristotle too rationalist and materialist. We get a brief mention of Margaret Fuller, whom we're going to discuss in a moment, but let's go to the next page, Jeff, and that interesting part about Henry David Thoreau and civil disobedience.
Right. It shouldn't shock anybody that a figure like Antigone was very much beloved by someone like Thoreau, and by these romantics who say, someone who's kind of shaking their fist at the powers that be,
at the establishment.
Right. So on page 133, Richard writes, like many early American believers in natural law, Thoreau was influenced as much by Sophocles' Antigone as by the Stoics. In the play, Antigone defies the king's edict against burying her brother, who must be buried if his soul is to find rest. In his highly influential Letters from a Pennsylvania Farmer, the patriot John Dickinson had quoted Antigone's Declaration of Natural Law in support of his own resistance to parliamentary taxes. Quote, I could never think a mortal's law of power or strength sufficient to abrogate the unwritten law divine, immutable, eternal, not like those of yesterday, but made ere time began. So I think you can see in this a lot of the ideals of the American Revolution, right?
Definitely.
The stick it to King George. Continuing with Richard, less than a century later, Thoreau, like Dickinson, learned from Antigone's discourse on natural law and her resultant resistance to injustice that he must give his own allegiance to natural law rather than to human statutes. While writing his essay on resistance to civil government, were you forced to read that?
I don't think I've read it.
I had to read it in high school. Yeah.
Okay.
While writing that essay, Thoreau returned to Antigone, which he had read as an undergraduate, and translated passages concerning the heroine's defiance of civil authority. Thoreau's more famous on civil disobedience, that's the one. That's
more famous essay?
Yes.
Right.
Advocated resistance to the statutes that conflicted with natural law as determined by the individual conscience. In turn, Thoreau's essay inspired Mohandas Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and other modern advocates of civil disobedience.
I see.
Right. So there's that kind of that nonconformist
right.
In the service of justice.
Which I think is probably more in keeping with the general American spirit than what the founders were doing.
Yeah.
So here I'm going to tip my hand a little bit. I like the founders more in terms of their view of the classics. It's not slavish to imitate, despite what John Adams said. We want to imitate the great things of the men of the past and the women, but the Romantics are probably in their pragmatism a lot closer to the general American spirit.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that too. And I think Sophocles would disagree with Thoreau's reading of Antigone.
Yes,
to say the truth, right?
For sure.
So that Antigone has been kind of become a ready-made, kind of feminist heroine.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the classics are there to be reinterpreted and retold. But I think I always go back to that. If you're going to be a hero or a heroine in a Sophocles play, you have to be alive at the end of it.
That's right.
And so that I don't think Greeks would have seen her.
And you can't be a commoner. You have to be descended from royalty.
Exactly.
From the gods.
Right. Exactly. And so
so to take the theology out of the play,
yes,
is to do an injustice.
Indeed.
To Sophocles' main point.
Indeed. I see what Thoreau's doing here. It's just kind of at odds with what I think that its original intent would have been.
But we're crusty old classicists.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
exactly.
what we would think.
That's
Skipping
right.
ahead to page 138, let's talk about Margaret Fuller,
yes.
a fascinating individual,
yes,
about whom I previously knew nothing.
Yeah,
How about you?
Same here. I thought this was really quite striking. Yes.
Do you want to pick it up in the middle there from 1839 to 1844?
Yes, from 1839 to 1844, Fuller organized 10 series of conversations at a bookstore with women who paid $20 to hear her speak about many different subjects. Now, $20.
That's a lot of money.
In 1839?
Like $500 or something like
seriously,
that?
Right. I mean, we learn above this that, Fuller, I think it was her father who gave her kind of a pile of books.
Right.
And she was particularly enamored with Ovid.
Yes.
Right?
I wish we could have her on the podcast, right?
Indeed.
Some Ovid vignettes.
Yes. Continuing on, her observations on classical mythology were considered so interesting that she was asked to repeat them for men. In these conversations, Fuller expressed the opinion that some of the gods were representations of human faculties and attributes. Apollo was an origination power, Mercury an executive power. Apollo was the light side of genius, Bacchus its warm side.
Does genius have a light and a warm side? Is it like the McDLT, for example, of the ancient past?
Now you are going way back.
That's a deep cut to the 80s, right? The McDonald's hamburger, where
right.
they separated the patty from the lettuce until the very last moment.
Exactly.
To keep the hot side hot.
And the cool side cool.
Exactly.
Yes, I remember those awful advertisements.
So genius is like that.
Yeah.
I suppose it has a light side and a warm side.
Well, I think
not a dark side and a cold side.
I think when I was reading this, it strikes me that she anticipates Nietzsche.
Oh yes,
right? The Apollonian and the Dionysian.
For sure.
As kind of this is put it's much too squishy for me.
Right.
But Apollo being the rational side and Bacchus or Dionysus being the wildness and
right.
nature and culture that are kind of push and pull against each other. Right.
Yeah, I like the traditional Christian interpretation of the gods, which is that they were real persons. They were not representations of forces or impulses. But I guess in the Enlightenment time in which these individuals worked, that was not an option.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean,
do you want to continue? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, I think this not only anticipates Nietzsche, but I think this is very much true of the way a lot of modern scholars would kind of interpret the gods. Yes, yep.
So Apollo was the light side of genius, Bacchus its warm side.
Yeah, why don't you continue there, Dave?
Yeah, the story of Psyche was like that of Adam and Eve, in which suffering led to purification and redemption. Minerva, a model for women, was wisdom, which sprang from the intelligent creative power, just as Minerva had sprung from the head of Jupiter. Rhea represented productive energy, which rescued Jupiter, who represented indomitable will, from Saturn, who represented time. It's very elaborate.
Yes.
Juno, the female form of indomitable will, always lost when she opposed Jupiter, the superior male form. Jupiter's defeat of the Titans represented the victory of the will over the low and sensual passions. This is almost like Freud or something.
It anticipates a lot of that too. Yeah, right.
Though Vulcan, who represented mechanic art, was powerful, he was not comparable to the perfect wisdom of Minerva, which sprang ready-armed from the masculine will. Fuller concluded that while, quote, the age of Greece was an age of poetry, the 19th century was an analytical age, a fair assessment considering her own reduction of Greek mythology to a set of universal abstractions. Richard nails it.
Yeah.
I don't want to read stories that are a reduction to a set of universal abstractions.
Right.
Do you? I don't find that appealing.
No, I don't find that appealing.
I want to read Ovid as, these are great stories.
Right. Yeah. I thought it was really interesting is, Richard, I think he talks about it with Fuller, that she did not have a lot of time for the kind of the contemporary Christianity of her day. She kind of found it kind of
definitely not
cold and kind of keeps you at arm's length, and she was much more drawn to kind of the wildness and the chaos of these stories, and found in it perhaps a better explanation of human nature.
So she wrote a book called Woman in the 19th Century in 1845. This is on page 139, and she claimed that the ancients, says Richard, had represented the two aspects of women's nature as Muse and Minerva. Muse was the traditional stereotype of women, inspiring man to create while not herself creating. Minerva partook of traditionally masculine qualities, including rationality and independence.
So I think you see that kind of reflective of kind of an early feminist movement happening, right? So and seeing kind of I mean, it doesn't surprise me that she would be drawn to Athena, to Minerva, as a powerful symbol, someone who has a foot in both kind of the traditional domestic world of the woman and the adventurer warrior world of the man, and both, and say, well, the feminine can embody both of those.
But like with Emerson, it's once again the instrumentalization of education. True. It has to serve some kind of purpose.
Yes.
And I don't really like that.
Right.
What about Fuller's tragic end on the bottom of 139? This is fascinating.
Yes. So Richard writes that Fuller died a tragic death when her ship, returning from Rome, was sunk by a hurricane. Just a little bit of background. I did some more background reading about her, and so she moved to Italy and lived there a long time. She had married an Italian, and they had a son, Angelo, and all three of them were coming back to the States. And
on the Concorde, or
I don't know what the name of the ship was.
But, I mean, that plane.
The plane one. No, this is 18.
Okay.
So pre-Concorde.
Okay.
Yeah. But the ship sunk by a hurricane. I also learned that it was like not in the middle of the Atlantic, but it actually crashed on a sandbar 100 yards from Fire Island, which is just south of Long Island in New York.
So this was close.
It was close, and many people were able to jump off it and swim for it. But as Richard here picks it up, unfortunately, the history of the Roman Republic that Fuller had just completed perished with her. She was swept by a wave over the rails, along with her husband and her 2-year-old son, and they all died.
So she had written a history of the Roman Republic, but it sank when the boat went down.
It was right. So this is one of these. I was doing some reading about this too. This is one of these things that many scholars wish that. It's a huge loss.
Sure,
would love to have seen what.
I'm very curious
what she would have had to say. Yeah.
Right.
Thomas Carlyle wrote to Emerson that her life, Fuller's life, was, quote, as wild as the prophecy of a Sibyl, the Roman oracle. Her focus on mythology demonstrated how the expansion of classical interest beyond political history and theory, the great preoccupations of the Founders' Age, to encompass drama and poetry, could give politically disenfranchised women and others focused on self-improvement a greater connection to the classics than had been possible in the 18th century. So there's kind of a democratic expansion of the franchise
via the classics.
Via the classics.
Right. And while I think it's great that the franchise was expanded, and I would probably share some of Fuller's general feminist interests, not all the way, but, I'm a man of the late 20th, early 21st century. Mm-hmm. I guess it's not early 21st anymore. We're a quarter of the way.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
Still, I object to Fuller, not for those things, but for the instrumentalization of the stories.
Right.
Read Ovid for his own sake.
Right, exactly.
That's the drum I'm beating.
I think, I guess maybe with kind of the transcendentalists, kind of more mystical interests, we might get a kind of a taste of kind of an appreciation of the classics for their own sake.
Okay.
But time and time again, Richard comes around to is like, well, how can it serve the present moment? And I'm with you. When you reduce it just to kind of like a handbook,
right?
A checklist.
Here's the impulse to power. Here's the impulse to passion. Here's the impulse of genius.
It loses its magic.
Because that's not how I don't think that is how the ancient authors saw it.
I agree. Yeah.
We have to talk a little bit about the marble faun.
Okay. Let's talk about it.
Nathaniel Hawthorne. This is pages 140 and 141.
Okay.
Says Richard, the direct product of Hawthorne's tour of Italy in the late 1850s was a work entitled The Marble Faun, published in 1860. Subtitled The Transformation, in a clear reference to Ovid's Metamorphoses. The protagonist, Donatello, is treated half as a mythical being, half as a human, somehow descended from gods. The villain meets his end in an apt way, being hurled from the Tarpeian rock like the Roman traders of old. After Donatello commits this act, he is abandoned by all of his friends except for the owl, Athena's companion, which symbolizes Donatello's newfound wisdom gained through sin and suffering.
Okay.
So this is a very popular and successful book that Hawthorne wrote. I don't think anybody reads it today.
I've never heard of it.
Had you never heard of the title even?
Before this chapter? No. I mean, it sounds fascinating.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It sounds a little bit like Lewis's famous Till We Have Faces with Cupid and Psyche, a modern retelling of an ancient myth.
Yes.
In the middle of page 141, Jeff, could you pick it up where Richard is talking about the marble faun and the classical world?
Yes. Richard writes, it is indicative of the hold of the classical world on antebellum Americans that the marble faun, not the Scarlet Letter, or any of Hawthorne's other stories set in the American past, was the most commercially and critically successful of his books. That's astounding.
Isn't it? Nobody knows its name today.
Right. That's crazy. Continuing. For decades, American visitors to Rome brought a copy of the novel with them, relishing its beautiful descriptions of the sights and sounds of the Eternal City. Hawthorne himself wrote in the preface to The Marble Faun, quote, in rewriting these volumes, the author was somewhat surprised to see the extent to which he had introduced descriptions of various Italian objects, antique, pictorial, and statuesque. Yet these things fuel the mind, everywhere in Italy and especially in Rome, and cannot easily be kept from flowing out upon the page when one writes freely and with self-enjoyment. And again, while reproducing the book, with a northern blast always howling in my ears, the complete change of scene made these Italian reminiscences shine out so vividly that I could not find it in my heart to cancel them.
So it's escapism, kind of.
Yes. Yeah.
So there is Hawthorne not trying to set fire to the Elgin marbles and so forth,
right?
But actually appreciating something about the beauties of Italy.
Indeed. I mean, that's why I'd love to read about the marble faun. He didn't just come around on his second visit to the British Museum. Mm-hmm. He kind of he said, okay, I was wrong about that, and he incorporates that kind of that love in his later work.
Well, maybe someday we'll do an episode on the marble faun.
Yeah.
Or at least on the marble rye, perhaps.
I saw what you did there.
All right.
Yeah. All right, Dave, you had mentioned Melville early.
Correct.
Let's get down to a little bit about Melville and the classics.
Yes, because unlike you, I liked the novel Moby Dick.
All right.
Page 142. It was in Moby Dick, 1851, perhaps the greatest of all American novels.
Really?
Well, less than 500 copies sold in his lifetime.
Yeah, that's right. He was not appreciated in his day. Was right? Yeah.
Continuing, that Melville moved beyond the use of classical mythology for descriptive purposes to a reliance upon it for tragic elevation and structure. Meditating deeply on the masterpieces of the Athenian stage, as well as on Shakespearean dramas that his edition of Shakespeare compared to the Greek tragedies, Melville learned that tragedy was based on three elements: the greatness of the hero, the seriousness of his crime, and the torment of his suffering. Each of these elements Melville employed successfully in Moby Dick. His Ahab was based partly on Prometheus. So, are you a little more interested in Melville?
I'm a little bit more curious.
Is your interosity piqued, as they say, Pickwood?
Mildly, right?
Okay.
I don't know I'm going to be running out to kind of pick up a copy of Moby Dick and delve into it, but...
it's a whale of a tale.
Oh, man, you had to, didn't you? Right? But yes, I'd be much more interested to look at Moby Dick through that particular lens.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's all we're going to say about Melville and Moby Dick for now. Perhaps in a future episode we can plumb the depths, you might say, of that novel and
I'm
its
open to that.
Classical references.
Yes.
Okay. Don't call me here, Ishmael, right?
That's right.
And now we skip to the end and Plutarch, a big helping of Plutarch before we finish up this episode.
All right, so the chapter ends looking at Plutarch, and Richard writes that Plutarch was one of Ralph Waldo Emerson's favorite authors. Emerson wrote, quote, "We cannot read Plutarch without a tingling of the blood," and called the biographer the elixir of Greece and Rome.
Those are odd metaphors.
Very odd. I've read Plutarch. I never felt my blood tingling.
No.
I like Plutarch. But he thought of Plutarch's heroes when traveling in Sicily. He made certain that Plutarch's Lives was on the reading list of a young Hillman Simpson. Homer?
No,
Hillman Simpson, whose education Emerson financed and supervised following the death of Hillman's father. In 1837, Emerson wrote, "Plutarch I esteem a greater benefactor than Aristotle. To him we owe the Brasidaces, the Dions, the Phocions, and the other men." All right, this was also new to me. I didn't know how large Plutarch loomed in this era and for these particular.
Well, he's a great storyteller, right?
Yeah,
and he's a biographer, and he compares all of these men in the parallel lives, but also the Moralia.
Right.
Richard will spend a lot of time talking about Plutarch's Moralia, which again is one of those works relatively unknown.
Right.
Yep. We should also mention, perhaps before we wrap it up, that Plutarch, this is page 149, contributed more than any other author, ancient or modern, to the great man theory.
Yes.
The belief that individual heroes were the primary determinant of the course of history, a theory prevalent during the antebellum period. It is no accident that when Emerson wrote history, he focused on important individuals and entitled the book Representative Men. Biographies of George Washington in imitation of Plutarch, ranging in authorship from John Marshall to Parson Weems, abounded, as did biographies of other great men. So I guess the Romantics, they like that connection to nature, the sense of the isolated individual defying authority, going against the establishment, not conforming.
Right.
And they get that from Plutarch.
Exactly. So history is driven by the nonconformist.
Yes.
Right?
Do you agree with that assessment?
I think there's definitely some truth to that.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think that there are, the example that I often use in class when I talk about, like theories of history is, Constantine at the Milvian Bridge, right? There's a moment where the world changes forever, through the actions and through the interpretations of one man.
That's true.
Right.
So, page 151, the final paragraph. Jeff, can you read just that first sentence, or maybe the first two sentences to wrap it up?
Yes. Richard closes us out. While the Romantics' admiration for Plutarch and interest in classical philosophy united them with the founders' generation, their deep love for and extensive use of the emotional and mystical elements of classical mythology separated them from the founders. Their application of the ancient myths of Greece to the new realities of American life produced a vibrant national literature that served the aesthetic and emotional needs of antebellum Americans.
That's a beautiful way to sum it up.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree. I think that I'm fascinated by that question of under what kind of system of governments can great literature be produced.
We didn't even talk about the Medicis.
Exactly right. So I think that's an open question. But Richard seems to think that to a large degree, the Romantics were right.
Yes.
Under kind of a democratic experiment, great literature can be produced.
They figured out a way to reinterpret the classics very differently than the founding generation.
Indeed.
And give Americans, a lot of literature that today nobody reads.
That's right.
Other than Scarlet Letter, Leaves of Grass.
Yes.
Billy Budd, maybe another Melville novel.
Yeah.
Bits of Moby Dick are assigned.
Does anybody read Moby Dick anymore?
Well, I did.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm nobody. What else? Nobody knows Margaret Fuller. They still read Thoreau for his essay on civil disobedience and
I mean, Poe is mentioned here. We didn't really go into it, but
no. Poe's a great author. But he strikes me as classical in his interests, not like these other guys. Right? But what do I know?
Yeah. Good stuff. But Dave, we got to get out of here.
We do.
And so before we go, Dave, can you tell us a little bit about if somebody out there wants to read learn how to read some Latin or Greek
for the fun of it, not for some political pragmatic reason.
Exactly right. You can help them.
I can help them. They should go to latinperdiem.com, check out one of my courses. I have Latin courses that take you from the beginning, ab initio. I have advanced classes and master classes. If you want to study Cicero, John Calvin, Theodore Beza, Erasmus, any of these guys, you can take one of my courses for under $100. And there's no pressure of being called on, being put on the spot, and you get access to all my expertise as much as you want, maybe more than you want. You can also go to the YouTube channel and check out more than 2,300 short, free instructional videos on both Greek and Latin. If you like something on the webpage, you want to sign up for a course, maybe Moss Method for Greek, use this coupon code 10+, 10 PLUS, and that'll get you 10% off anything on the site.
Excellent.
Jeff, we have some people to thank.
As always, yes. Mishka, our intrepid engineer, who turns this around so quickly and makes us sound better than we are.
That's right.
Always big thanks to her. Are these wonderful musicians, that screaming guitar you
hear.
That's
Mr. Jeff Sheets.
Jeff Sheets, yep.
The wonderful song Thrill Seeker, right? Which introduces the episode and closes it out. The thrill is learning and enjoying great literature.
Indeed, yes. And then also Ken Tamplin, too, who provides the bumper music that you also hear.
That's right.
On both sides of the ads. If you want to get a mention, if you want a shout out, if you want to suggest an episode, you have a correction, a critique, don't hesitate to write us a note. You can contact Dave at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V.
Or Jeff at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V. We poked a little fun at Tom in the beginning for the banter, but he was right.
Yeah, he was right.
We can learn from our audience, so please send us your comments, your critiques. A little bit of praise now and then is okay, too.
Yeah, we like that.
You know what our email address is, Jeff at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V. Jeff, what is coming up next week?
Well, we had promised a while back now a third episode talking about what's the best Greek textbook. So we want to fulfill that promise, and we'll pick that up in our next episode. We've got at least a couple more intro Greek texts to talk about.
Mastronard and Athanasi.
Yes.
And after that, we're looking at some wonderful episodes on how the Greeks built cities.
Yep.
Maybe something from Apologies, Socrates, Library of Alexandria, and then your favorite.
Oh, what are we doing? I can't even remember now.
H.I. Mahru.
Oh, yes, Mahru.
The MCU.
The MCU.
The Mahru Cinematic Universe.
So we got to get back to him
you can't miss that.
One of these days. I'm looking forward to it all.
All right.
And Dave, I believe you have our gustatory parting shot.
Yes, and I don't have any particular enthusiasm for this GPS, this gustatory parting shot. This comes from someone named Anthony T. Hinks.
Yes.
And the quote is just 3 words.
Yes, and what are they?
Happy Cabbage Day.
Is that an annual thing?
I don't know, but I'm going to skip it. Thanks for listening.